Alright, in this video we're going to be going over how to make your card game function the way that you want to. And we're going to do this using a couple concepts and methods through test playing, okay? So let's get into it. Alright, the first concept we're going to go over is what makes a card game unique. And there's tons of things that make a card game unique, but this is in regards to functionality, okay? So let's talk about a fighting game first. When we start our match with our character, we're given a set number and amount of tools, right? We're given our light, medium, heavy kicks, punches, super specials. When we press buttons, those things happen, okay? So when we're attempting to test something specific, we're given that at the beginning of the match, all right? And our opponent is too. Now, this is where the difference lies in testing your game. All right, let's talk about Yu-Gi-Oh, right? In Yu-Gi-Oh, you start the game typically with 40 cards, and you have 3 copies of every card in your deck. So what does this mean? This means that essentially, if you're starting the game with 5 to 6 cards in your hand, every game is going to be completely different from the last one. So if you've played 10 games in a row, all right, that's your test playing session, you may not have seen some cards. So you're going to want to make changes based off of the 10 games you've played. But how do you know if you should make certain changes if you haven't seen all of the cards and how they work together? You haven't seen everything you need to see to make these changes. Well, we're going to talk about that. Okay, so the first method we're going to go over is a method that's going to allow you to keep track of the things you have and haven't seen and make changes accordingly. Okay, so these are all cards in Ruin. These are all creature cards, or in other games, monster cards, followers, whatever you want to call them. These are the cards that we do battle with, okay? These are all just example pictures. None of this is our artwork, but this is what our game looks like. But anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to take all the cards in our deck, creatures, spells, everything in our deck. Excuse me. We're going to write them on a piece of binder paper. Every time we see a card, every time a card is in our hand that we could potentially use, we're going to put a tally next to the card, okay? Not every time we play the card, but every time that we could potentially use the card, we're going to put a tally next to the card. We do that so we know we've seen the card, right? Now, every time we play the card, we're going to put either a plus or a minus. The plus essentially means the card functioned, it worked. We played it and it went well, all right? And we're going to put a minus if the card doesn't function or if it doesn't go well, if our opponent counters the card, okay? If we got nothing off of that play or if we got very little. And it's going to look something like this. All right, so let's talk about some of these different things. So we're going to look at a card like Vor first, right? It looks like every time we've seen the card, there's 4 tallies, and there's 2 pluses and 2 minuses. That means we can play the card at least, right? And it functions about half the time. Now, this could be really good. This could essentially mean that the card works, but there's some counterplay to it. And I would say that's how you want most cards to be, all right? Now, let's look at a card like Chaos Slug. This card essentially worked every time. It looks like it's hyper consistent. Now, this can be okay, but you don't want it to happen in a way that significantly changes the game unless the card is difficult to play, right? There should be less pluses than dashes, essentially. Say for every 2 dashes we have a plus, but if it's a plus every time, if the card is always functioning, always giving you advantage, there might be an issue with the card, there might not. It's really about the pacing of your game. How do you want it to play? If the card is fun, I mean, the most important thing is, are the cards fun? Yeah, they should work, yeah, they should be balanced, but ultimately the most important thing is making sure your game is fun to play, okay? So these aren't going to be our problems right now, right? We're not going to worry about Vor, Chaos Slug. We're not going to worry about any of the cards that we've seen, even Chrono, right? We've seen this card 3 times. We've only got to play it once and it didn't go well. We're not going to worry about this. Not yet, at least. Because this is too small of a sample size and we haven't even seen certain cards, right? Chrono might work really well with one of these 2 cards or both of these cards. And, if these cards are allowing Chrono to function in a way that's, constantly positive, it's constantly impacting the game in a positive manner, then maybe we don't need to change Chrono, right? Maybe we need to look at something else first, change some other things first, But how do we know, right? It's by using this method, okay? So if we haven't seen Gary the Ghost, we haven't seen Falco, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at our paper. We're going to see, okay, we haven't seen these 2 cards, and we're not going to tell our opponent we're doing this, and they're going to be doing the same thing, all right? This is somebody who's test playing with you. You're both doing this process and using this method, okay? I'm going to select a few of these cards and start with those cards in my hand. And I'm not going to do the same cards, 5 games in a row. I'll pick a few games where I start with Gary the Ghost, then I'll pick a few games where I start with Flacco, because I don't want the other person knowing the cards I have. That's going to defeat the purpose, right? You're going to play differently if you know what your opponent has And you don't want your game to be played like that. I mean, you want it to be played the way it's supposed to be played, natural. Like, we don't know what the other player has. Even if you do, at least, you know, try to act like you don't, I guess. But that's easier said than done. You're always going to play different, so mix it up. Mix it up what you're adding to your hand at the beginning. Mix up what you're starting with. So this is the first method. I would say the second method is the most important, but this one's still really useful, right? So let's go ahead and get into the second concept now. All right, so we're going to be going over variables while testing. And this is effects, traits, just mechanics in general, okay? Let's take a look at these cards on the screen. We have Pot of Greed, which says draw 2 cards from your deck. And we have How, draw 3 cards from your deck. Now this is Yu-Gi-Oh! And this is Pokemon. So let's talk about Pot of Greed first. This card is not allowed in competitive play. It has been banned pretty much since the beginning of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, all right? Now, why is that? Well, in Yu-Gi-Oh, there's no limitation on these cards. There's no cost. With your magic cards in Yu-Gi-Oh, they're called spells now, I believe. You can play as many of them in a turn as you want, as long as you have them in your hand. There's typically no limitation. There might be some type of cost or requirement, but for Pot of Greed, you just play it, and you draw 2 cards. And that's the issue with this card, is there's no mana system in Yu-Gi-Oh! You don't have to do anything aside from play the card. That's the problem, right? Now, Pokemon also is a game where the cards don't cost anything. You can just play the cards from your hand, like this Trainer Supporter here. You can just play this directly from your hand, but it says draw 3 cards. So why can you play the maximum number of this card in any deck, right? You can play 4 of this card in any given deck. It's not limited in any way whatsoever in the game. Well, it's all because of the mechanics of the game. And these are the variables we're going to be going over, right? So it says draw 3 cards. It's literally better than Pot of Greed. But the difference is this is a Trainer Supporter. And what that essentially means is that while I can play it directly from my hand, similar to a spell with no cost, I can only play one of these per turn. All right. And Pokemon is a game of once per turn. So you can only evolve a Pokemon once per turn. You can only play an energy on a Pokemon once per turn. You can only play a Trainer Supporter once per turn. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very unlimited game. The only thing you can do one of in a turn is normal summon a monster. But spell cards, you can play as many of them as you want in a turn. So that's why a card like Pot of Greed is so powerful in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! But a card like How is a card that, while it's really good and really consistent, not every deck even plays the maximum number of these cards. There's cards that can let you go +7, +8 in Pokemon, but the reason it's not super good is because you're very limited on your turn, right? So this is the thing you have to keep in mind when designing your cards. You're going to have to know through testing, you know, what mechanics, what fundamental things are more powerful in my game, what things are lackluster in my game. Is drawing cards super, super good in my game? Does it give me such a big advantage to where if I +1, like in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh, am I going to win the game potentially? Or is it going to be more similar to Pokemon where I could draw 6 to 7 cards in a turn and it doesn't even matter that much? Yes, it's beneficial, but it's not game breaking, okay? Now we're going to get into the second method. All right, so these numbers look a little confusing, very confusing, I'm sure, but we're going to go over exactly what they are. First, let's take a look at our card, okay? And we're going to keep the variables in mind when going over all of this, all right? This is where the variables are key. So this card right here has a cost, all right? This is a ruin card. This is our game. This is like our mana system. They're called resources. This card costs 2. It's got 1 strength, and it's got 1 health, okay? And its trait is threat. Now, these are the variables, right? This is a variable. This is a variable. And anything that is not numbers, that are not concrete numbers, are going to be variables, okay? So the main thing that we had trouble with when designing your game at first was the numbers. You know, what strength do we make a card that has 3 costs? Like, if a card costs 3 resources, what should its strength and health be? Well, we were kind of just winging it for a long time, and it felt really funky. It didn't quite feel right, and we decided, hey, you know, we're going to give ourselves an advantage. We're going to decide when we first design a card, let's give it a set number based off of its cost, okay? And then we'll change it as we go. That's where the variables come in, all right? Now we're starting to know, okay, if a card allows us to draw cards, it needs to cost a little more and have maybe a little less strength. Like in our game, attacking twice is really powerful. So let's take a look at this graph and kind of say, like, talk about what we did with our different effects that are more powerful in our game. So we use a minimum to maximum thing with these numbers, okay? And I'm assuming your cards are going to have some type of numbers on it, whether it be cost, attack, defense, whatever. So for the cost of your cards, pick a minimum to maximum. In our game, a creature can cost anywhere from 1 to 10 resources, okay? So that's what these are. This right here is the offensive stat in our card. This is what we call strength in our game. So as you can see, this isn't perfect math. We just kind of picked some numbers. We were like, okay, we're going to have cards generally be these numbers, all right, when we very first design the card. So when we pick a 1-drop, we're going to make it have anywhere 3, 5, 8 strength. It doesn't matter, just in this ballpark, right? For testing, for when we very first design the card. If it costs 2, it's going to have this amount of strength. And you can see over on this side, this is our health, right? The health system in this game it's very much so different from other games, but it's just a minimum maximum thing, right? Just minimum maximum. Keep that in mind. What is the minimum to maximum health you're typically going to have on your creatures, right? Use that for this number over here. So take your cost of your cards, your strength of your cards, and your health or defense of your cards, and break them down into a graph like this. So that way, when you very first design a card, you can go back, look at this graph, like, okay, I think I want this card to cost 3, right? It's going to cost 3 mana. So I could give anywhere from 16 to 18 strength, right? Those are pretty small numbers. I could vary them a little bit if I want to. It's not going to cause too much issues. And it's going to have 2 health, 2 defense, whatever you have in your game. So what's going to happen is when you go to test play, let's say your first 2 decks, is you're going to be able to tell what things are better than other things because all of your numbers are similar, right? If a card costs 2 strength, costs 2 resources and has 10 health, and another card also costs 2 and has 10 health, but they have different effects, and one card is severely outperforming another card, it's because of the variables. Now okay, attacking twice is really powerful in this game. These cards literally have these same stats, but this card is severely outperforming. When I use my method 1, it's got constant pluses. The other card, it's inconsistent. It's got more pluses, more minuses, whatever, right? So I know I need to change that card with constant pluses. Maybe I need to dumb that card down a little bit, make it a little less consistent. And now I know going forward, just keep notes of this. Attacking twice is really good, right? The effect needs to be few and far between, or the stats on the creature that has that ability need to be low, right? So, every game is going to be different. Some things are going to be stronger in one game and weaker in another, and you're only going to know this through test playing, okay? So what I'm getting at is devise a graph like this for your game. It does not have to be mathematically perfect. You can see ours is nowhere near that, but it's going to give you a platform, something fundamental to build off of, right? If all your cards have generally the same stats when you design your first 2 decks, you can start to make changes slowly based off of the first method, okay? That's pretty much it. This is what we used. We've been doing something like this for the last several years, and our games really got to a point where we feel like quality-wise, fundamentally and mechanically, it's on par with the big games. It plays just as good as Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, Hearthstone, if not a little better. It's hard to say. It's very subjective what's better or worse, but, it's good. It functions really good. And before it did, but it didn't. It was just, it's not like it is now. So I really hope you guys like this video. This is going to be like a whole series, essentially, on making a card game that we're doing, and let me know if this helped you in the comments below. Let me know the methods you used as well too. Like, what are some of the concepts and methods that you guys apply to the test playing process that have helped you? And that's pretty much going to be it. I'll see you guys in the next one.